It's so rare that I get to offer you a quick fix. We know that writing is a slog. It's a process of writing, revising, sending your paper to a tutor, asking me questions, and then rewriting some more. It's a process. But today I have some quick fixes. There are some words that you can cut right now. Let's talk about words that you should cut most of the time. There are exceptions to all of these rules. You can find plenty of examples of professional writers who use these words, but when in doubt, if you can't think of a good reason for including one of these words, cut them and replace them with something more specific. Avoid vague words. Thing, essentially, society, good or bad, throughout human history, aspect, factor, etc., and it speaks for itself. All of these words are way too vague in general to have any real meaning. Thing, you can almost always replace that with something more precise, unless, of course, you're trying to call attention to the generality there. Good and bad, those words basically are meaningless at this point. You can be much more precise. And then throughout human history, that's become so cliche and that it encompasses so many years that it's essentially meaningless. Notice how I just said essentially meaningless? Why not just say meaningless? Would be much better. Announcements. Generally, you want to get rid of announcements in academic writing. So for some essays, you can use first person. You always want to look at the prompt and see if first person I is appropriate or if second person you is appropriate. Usually we use third person. You don't, even if you're allowed to use first person, you don't want to be redundant or announce your intentions. Avoid saying things like, personally, I feel. I feel is already personal, so you can get rid of the personally part. You can probably even get rid of the I feel altogether. It's implied. As stated previously, what this writer is trying to say. Instead, just state what the writer is saying. Don't announce. Now I'm going to talk about what this writer is trying to say. This quote means, my thesis is that. To sum up, that just kind of sounds juvenile. And in conclusion, that also sounds like basic high school level writing. We can do so much better than that. So meta commentary is good. We've looked at examples of meta commentary in writing before. That's where authors or writers comment on what they're doing in their essay. That can be really effective, but you don't want to announce what you're doing when it's unnecessary. Even though all of these phrases that you see below you, all of these would be great in a rough draft. In fact, writing something like this quote means can be a great thing to include in a rough draft because it will force you to analyze the quote. Or writing, my thesis is that would be great to include in a rough draft because it'll force you to articulate your thesis. When you actually turn in your essay, get rid of these announcements because they're redundant and they weaken your writing. Intensifiers. These are words, they can be adverbs. These are words that unnecessarily add fillers to your writing. Really, very, quite, rather, quickly, slowly. So I'm not saying to never use these words, but generally, instead of saying something like walked slowly, you could say ambled or strolled. Instead of saying really big, you could say huge or an even more vivid word. These are words that aren't very effective. Most of the time, you can get rid of them in your writing. And then, of course, redundancy. I find that when I'm speaking, I say redundant things all the time. I say, ask the question, but instead I should just say, ask. Blend together, ask the question. In the event that, just say if. But yet, those mean the same thing, only include one. Revert back, just say revert. Equal to one another, get rid of to one another, that's the same thing as equal. And at this time, you can just say now. You can also just drop it all together. I also think at this time kind of sounds very bureaucratic or kind of clinical or cold. Just get rid of that altogether or just say now. Why use 3 blah words when one word will do the trick? And then one more example I have is something I've noticed a lot in student writing. Students will write something like this. Is Google Making Us Stupid? That's the name of an article we read by Nicholas Carr. He writes, now, at first, it doesn't seem like there's anything wrong with that, but it's redundant because we have by Nicholas Carr and then he writes, followed by the rest of the sentence. Why not just say, in Is Google Making Us Stupid? Nicholas Carr writes. That way I get rid of the unnecessary pronoun he, and I get rid of by, right? That makes the writing much more to the point. When in doubt, get rid of those words.